Now that you have basic information about forms in HTML, the next thing you want to consider is this. So when my form is completed, when my form is filled out, what happens to the form? Where does the form go to? For instance, if the name, your username, and the password is filled out here and a submit is clicked, what really happens? Well, what really happens is that you have to set where that form goes to, and then once you put that into your HTML form, that information contained in the form is sent to that place. And this is quite easy to achieve, although it may be a little bit beyond the scope of this beginner course, but then let's cover it a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this. Now let's look at the first form, which is this form, and just try to see what I'm trying to talk about right here. So we have here the form starting, and then we have the form closing out here. Okay, good. Now what you want to do is, once you have built out your form like this, you want to tell HTML where the form should be submitted to. And in order to do that, you want to add something called an action attribute. So what you want to do is you want to add an action attribute, and then you want to tell that form to submit to a particular place. For instance, if you want that form to go to a website, like probably you want, this is just an example, in real life scenarios you would not really do this. So if you want the form to go to something like google.com, then it means that once the action is set to go to google.com, when this form is submitted, the information contained in this form is sent to this URL. But in real life situation, you probably want to have, depending on the technology you are using to process your form, you probably want to have throw something like a form handler, okay, to handle the form.php or something like that. So if you're a PHP person, you want to have something like, so once that form is submitted, the form gets passed to this file, which then processes the content of the form and does whatever it is you want with the form. Now, the last thing you want to know about forms for now in this beginner course is you want to know what we call the action of the form. Now there are two, okay, we've talked about the action, you want to know the method by which the form is submitted. And there are two methods by which a form can be submitted. We have the get and the post method. Now when you add the method to the form, it defines how that form is submitted. So if I go ahead and add an attribute like method here, and I say get, then it means that when this form is submitted, so I'm just going to do a file, and I'm going to do a save, and I'm going to remove this handler, and I'm just going to leave it as blank. Now when I leave it as blank, it means you are saying that the form should be submitted to itself, so to speak. So if you put method get, it means that whatever you put into this form is going to show in the URL. So if I do a refresh, and I do the username as user, and I do the password as pass, and I do a submit, then you would see right here, because I am using the get attribute here, you would see that in the URL here, you have the username showing as user and the password showing as pass, and then the content of this form is just sent right there. That's how get works. So if I change the username to my name, and I change the password to pass123, and I do a submit, you would see that the username, which is uname, becomes my name, and the password becomes pass123. Now that's a GET request. So when you send your form as a GET, this is what you get. And that is why when you begin to get advanced and you are moving outside the scope of HTML, you don't want to submit things that have sensitive information or forms that have sensitive information using the GET method. You want to do a post. So a post method will not display the content of the form in the browser like this. Instead, it will submit that form to whatever action you have put in place. So let me just recap what we have covered in this lesson. Now, in this lesson, we talked about submission of forms. Although this is a little bit out of the scope of this particular lesson, but it's good you have an idea of how forms are submitted. And when forms are submitted, there are two basic things that you need. You need what we call the action attribute of the form and the method of the form. The action attribute of the form tells the form where it should submit to. So the content of the form that has been filled has to be submitted somewhere, and the action directs the form where that content should be submitted to. It can be a file in your website, it can be a file outside your website, it can be a URL. But then the action tells the form where the content or the information filled into the form should be sent to. When you leave it as blank, you are saying, oh, form, process this form by yourself, so it submits to itself. But then when you give probably a URL or you say a file, for instance, I'm assuming this file is available on our site or inside directory. If I do handler.php, then when this form is submitted, the content of the form will be sent to the handler.php file. Now the method describes how that form will be submitted. If the form is submitted as a post, then you won't really see the content of the form, but then it is sent to this handler, and then the handler can read whatever the user has sent and process it. So for forms that have sensitive information like credit card numbers, that have sensitive information like bank accounts, that have sensitive information like passwords, you want to definitely use a post request. And then for the GET request, if you're doing things that are trivial and don't require a lot of attention, then you can use a GET request. So one thing you have at the back of your mind is when you set the method as GET, whatever is submitted in the form will show up like this in the URL, depending on how you have set things up. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.